Good morning, everyone. Welcome to CSIS. I'm Kathleen Hicks. I direct the International Security Program here, and I also oversee our Smart Women, Smart Power initiative. We're very pleased to have you with us today, whether you're in the room or online. And I know that you will join me with enjoyment in welcoming Iowa Senator Joni Ernst for what's sure to be a great conversation about some of the world's hotspots and security challenges today. Obviously, there's no end to those or end to the list of those, but we'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have available. I want to give you a few social media reminders. We ask that you do follow us on Twitter, and we're at Smart Women. Senator Ernst has 2 Twitter accounts. They are at Joni Ernst and at Sen Joni Ernst. Be sure also to check out our Smart Women podcast and iTunes U course, which you can access through iTunes. You can also go through SoundCloud, but we prefer you to use iTunes if you're able to. If you're live tweeting, and we do hope that you are, we ask you to use hashtag CSIS Live. That way we can pick up your comments and distribute them most broadly. If by chance a fire alarm goes off, we have 2 exits from this building. Exit areas are behind you and behind me, and depending on where the alarm is going off, we'll direct you which way you should be going. This Smart Women, Smart Power series would not be possible without support of Citi, and I also want to mention AT&T was kind enough to sponsor the networking breakfast that preceded the event this morning. I really want to thank Citi for their efforts to amplify the voices of women in foreign policy, national security, and international business. And so I'd specifically like to welcome Kristen Solheim here, who is the Director of Federal Government Affairs at Citi. Please join me in welcoming Kristen.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kathleen, and thanks again for joining us for this morning's event in the Smart Women, Smart Power series. It's been an honor to support these. And we continue to bring so many extraordinary women in foreign policy, national security, and the business community to give us their insights and expertise on so many fascinating issues. And today will be no exception. We're thrilled to have Senator Joni Ernst, the first female combat veteran elected to the U.S. Senate. She was elected in 2015 after serving 23 years in the military, including time in Iraq and Kuwait during Operation Iraqi Freedom. She represents my home state of Iowa, so I'm especially thrilled to have her today. At Citi, we represent more than 100 countries, and our unique global presence aids us in recognizing the challenges of operating in often uncertain and an unpredictable world, as we can all attest to today. With that in mind, we're pleased to have Senator Ernst here to share her perspective on security challenges in countries around the globe, from North Korea to Syria, Afghanistan, and the list goes on. Thank you so much for taking time to be here today. We're looking very forward to the discussion. Turn it back to you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. And I do want to just briefly introduce our moderator, CSIS Senior Associate, Nina Easton, who is also chair of Fortune's Most Powerful Women International Summit and the co-chair of the Fortune Global Forum. Nina, thank you as always for moderating today's event, and over to you.
Thanks, Kath. We're supposed to call you Joni. I almost said Senator Ernst. Thank you so much for being here. It's an honor. I've watched you from afar, and it's really a treat to be here with you. By the way, Joni, the senator, continues to exercise the theme of Smart Women, Smart Power in her own family. Your daughter is?
Yes, my daughter is at the preparatory school at the United States Military Academy. She wants to serve in the Army. Yeah, thank you.
You must be so proud.
I am very proud of her, very proud of her. She's a strong-willed young woman, but she believes in our country just as Mama and Daddy do, and she wants to serve. And she really does believe that she can make a difference, and I'm glad for that.
That's very powerful. So Joni is from a town called Red Oak in Iowa. It's Southwest Iowa. Southwest Iowa. You grew up on a farm.
Yes.
You went back to your hometown, and that's where you live now. She actually takes a flight into Omaha and has to drive an hour to get back to her town every weekend.
Every weekend.
What kind of a culture clash is it when you arrive at DCA from there?
It is very different back home. And we were talking about the Senator Ernst versus Joni thing. And I shared with Nina that back home, everybody has known me as Joni, whether it was growing up in that community, because that's where I grew up. That's where I served as a county auditor in Montgomery County. And when I even went to the state Senate, folks still called me Joni. But when I was elected to the United States Senate, then all of these people I'd known for my entire life came and they were, what do we call you now? Do we call you Senator? And no, you call me Joni.
Right.
That's what you know me by. So it's a very small town and everybody knows everybody. And when I'm back home, if I have the day off, no makeup, I can throw my running shorts on and a t-shirt and go to Hy-Vee and shop for groceries. And I always allocate about an hour because everybody wants to stop and get caught up. And it's not necessarily about big world issues. It's just, hey, Joni, how's it going? How's your husband? How's Libby doing at school? And all of that good stuff.
So we know from your campaign commercials that you grew up on a farm and you know how to castrate hogs. Everybody
Yes.
remember that?
Anybody from Iowa? Okay.
Yeah, who is from Iowa here? Anybody?
I've got a few. Good.
But what else did you learn growing up on that farm?
Well, hard work and determination, and we call them Iowa values, I guess. My parents just really instilled in me that work ethic. It was important, and I don't mind getting my hands dirty. I don't mind getting out there, whether it was helping my dad work in the fields, whether it was doing whatever needed to be done with livestock. Those are the things that we were taught, and you didn't grumble about it, and it wasn't a big deal because every other kid in that community was doing the same thing too. So we all worked together as a family, and growing up that way has brought an interesting perspective when I see other kids today that, you know, they think maybe dusting the house is beneath them, and I'm like, wow, I did a lot more than that, you know. So there's been a culture change over the years, but I think those values will carry on, at least with me and within my family.
So working like a family is not exactly what you're finding these days on Capitol Hill. But you and I were talking back in the green room about the connection between women senators.
Yes.
Talk about that and that
Absolutely.
one special relationship you've built.
Yes,
across the aisle.
absolutely. I do work a lot with other women senators, and I found that sometimes working with other women, we aren't so ingrained in a position that we're not flexible. And we found that there are other senators, sometimes of the male variety, that they will dig in so deep that then they are afraid to move away from that position. And so in building the bonds with the women senators, and I think there are 21 of us now, we really have that flexibility to get things done. You know, I have very strong views on certain issues, but I do understand the need to move forward. If we're not moving, we're not getting ahead. So if we can work together, find a solution to move us forward, at least I believe we're moving in the right direction. So the women senators do tend to get along really, really well. I was at an event with Deb Fisher last night. She and I probably work the most together on the Republican side. She's a neighbor from Nebraska, grew up much the same way I did as well. But across the aisle, one of the relationships that I really cherish the most is Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. And a lot of folks really are like, wow, you know, you are night and day difference. We do have very different policy ideas on probably 95% of the issues out there. But as I said with women, if you can find that 5% of the policies and issues you want to work on together, then we work on those issues. If we share those passions, why not? Right. So when we are outside of the Senate, we don't talk politics. We talk about our families, and I value that.
It's a good building block. You, of course, have an Army background, and you served in Iraq, driving supply convoys. Tell us about that.
Right.
And were there hair-raising moments?
Yes, there were a few, but this was the beginning of the war, the early part of Iraqi Freedom 1. And when we got into country, and we were permanently stationed in Kuwait at Camp Arif John. But what we did, we picked up supplies from the ports and the warehouses in Kuwait, and we would push as far north as Baghdad International Airport and log-based sites. So we would pick up those supplies and deliver them forward for our warriors up front. And yes, there were some issues that we had along the way, and we had not been in country very long when we got our first mission driving supplies into Iraq. We did not have maps. We didn't have, period. Transportation company and our battalion couldn't supply us with maps. They only had one map, which they used in their S3, in their operations cell. So they couldn't really send it with us because there are other units doing other things. They needed it. So what we did, we had a Tennessee National Guard unit at a nearby camp that had already made a trip up into Iraq. They didn't have maps either. So the company commander came over, sat down with me, sat down with my first sergeant, and our squad leaders, those that would be responsible for different movements going into Iraq. And he actually hand drew a map from the hand-drawn map that he had as well.
That's amazing.
That's how we navigated going north into Iraq. But keeping in mind too, there was a lot of movement at that time, a lot of convoys going up into Iraq. So we knew if perhaps we did take a wrong turn at some point, you can hunker down, you can try and backtrack, or you can hunker down. Safety first, of course, protecting our convoy and the supplies. But eventually, we knew that there would be other convoys making that route as well. So a lot of movement at that time. And yes, the Iraqis at that point were hostile in some situations to those of us bringing supplies north. And we had instances where the young men would swarm our convoys. And one, I think mostly they were just trying to pilfer items, anything that wasn't secured on the truck they would steal. But they would try and stop the convoys, and they would lay down in our path. And part of our rehearsals back home, and in order to keep us safe, is if they lay down in front of you, you just keep rolling forward. You don't stop because it puts everybody in jeopardy. And what we found out is those young Iraqi men weren't quite ready to meet Allah, and they'd hop up and run away before they actually got ran over. So
it was a show of strength. It was not backing down. Yeah,
exactly. So, but those were very intense moments because one, you don't want to make a mistake that would inflame the situation, but you knew if you were threatened, you would have to take action.
Yeah.
So you understand that going in. But fortunately, I brought all my soldiers home. There were 2 other transportation companies from Iowa that were in that same area, and they did not return as whole companies.
And how many were in your company?
150.
150. You were in charge
and
of the lives of 150
and
soldiers.
we
That's
came home.
Tremendous.
Yeah.
So that on-the-ground experience, I'm sure, has set you well in the Senate, where you're on the Emerging Threats Subcommittee, or the lead in that. So we're going to, because we have limited time, going to dive right into hotspots around the world, which is what I'm sure a lot of you want to hear now. There are cards on your chairs. Feel free to write out your question. Just one note, if I can't read it, I can't ask it, as Kath would say. So use your penmanship. And we'll collect the cards and ask them, because we do want to include audience, and there's questions, there's so many concerns going on in the world right now. Top of which is North Korea.
Let's talk Afghanistan.
I think we'll go from high. You've been getting briefings. You were at a briefing yesterday, did you say?
That's correct.
You know a lot of stuff you can't talk about. I realize that. But let me ask you broadly, do you think that there's a level, we've also been hearing a lot of rhetoric on both sides, as we all know, a lot of rhetoric coming from the White House. Is there a point at which rhetoric hurts our cause in trying to contain that threat?
There is rhetoric on both sides, and in this case, I don't think that's the determining factor at all. I think North Korea has been bent on obtaining nuclear capabilities for a very long time, and I don't see that it was the president or any of his words which spurred that action. I mean, this has been an ongoing process for them long before we had an administration change. So when the president is talking about North Korea and the leader in North Korea, I think that honestly he's speaking truth to the situation. When he says, you know, if North Korea comes at us, we're going to go back full force. Well, yeah, we're going to go back full force. There's no messing around with North Korea when they have nuclear capability. So, you know, I can't speak for the president, but I don't see that his words have worsened the situation at all. If anything, it has put North Korea on alert that if they keep moving ahead with their intentions of putting a nuclear warhead onto an ICBM, that if they should use that technology, then we're gonna go after them.
Take us through a scenario. Is there anything short of an actual missile launch with a nuclear device, or a missile launch that designed to inflict destruction? Is there anything short of that would cause a military intervention from our end?
Well, that would be up to, of course, our military leaders and advisors to advise Congress on those types of situations and to provide that guidance for the president. But there are a lot of things short of nuclear. Obviously, if they attack any of our allies or any of the countries in that region, there will be a response, a military response. But anything short of
military actual military action on their part?
Oh, should they not attack?
Yeah.
I don't see military intervention short of any attack, nuclear or otherwise. Provocation exists out there, and we will continue to patrol. We saw some of our bombers with fighter escorts that moved a little bit to the east of North Korea. That hasn't been done in a very long time, but you know what? International area, so we are in our rights to fly those areas. So I think as long as North Korea continues on the path that it's on, you will continue to see us build in our resolve to protect our allies and protect our own homeland. We will do everything we can short of war to deter this regime.
And let's talk about sanctions. We were having a fascinating conversation before we got on stage about both the effectiveness and the limitations of sanctions.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. We were having a great discussion about the sanctions, and we know there are UN sanctions out there. There are other sanctions that have been put in place by Congress. Other countries are engaging in sanctions. They have to be enforced in order to work, and there is a large black market between China and North Korea. That needs to be cut off. We need to make sure that other countries are enforcing their own sanctions. Otherwise, you won't see the impact that you want to see. But I was having a discussion with the South Korea trade minister 2 days ago, and he said, Senator, the way Americans view North Korea is not necessarily accurate. We think of North Korea in the 1990s state where North Koreans were maybe starving and they had a poor ag economy. And he said they actually have a very robust ag economy in North Korea where at least they're able to feed their people. Maybe it's not an American diet like we're used to, but they can feed their people. And so when we apply those sanctions, we also need to understand that they can self-sustain for a while. So it may be a number of months before we start to see the impact of those sanctions on North Korea.
And you were also making the point that, but having gotten to that level where they can actually eat, that when you start taking that away, you might see popular revolt.
Yes, and that's when you might see a popular revolt. So the standard of living is now a little bit higher in North Korea than it had been in the past. And those that experienced those decades of want and need now that those wants and needs have been met and fulfilled, they don't want to go back to that standard of living. So if we start to see that they're not able to sustain their own population internally, the living standards start to drop, you may see that popular revolt. But then what happens when the people rise up against such a brutal regime? Those are questions that are unanswered out there.
And how have you viewed China's behavior in the last 6 months? Has it evolved?
It has evolved, and they have, in my estimation, when it comes to North Korea, they have been very good partners for us.
In what way? Describe.
Working on the sanctions. One thing that, of course, we needed to do was to get the buy-in from China on sanctions. And China actually did move ahead with some of their own thoughts on how they could curtail goods going into North Korea. So they actually started moving even before maybe the UN gave instructions on sanctions. We have the greatest ambassador ever in China right now. He's former Iowa Governor Terry Branstad.
There you go, yeah.
So Governor Branstad has had a very long-term relationship with President Xi. They met in the 80s in Iowa and have maintained that relationship ever since then. So they do have a good understanding of each other. President Xi is well versed on the United States, and Governor Branstad, Ambassador Branstad, is well versed on China. And I think having that relationship has been very helpful, especially with what we see in North Korea right now. So I do feel that China has been stepping up to the plate. There will come a time that China is not able to do any more. And what happens when other countries and our influence starts to wane? What do we do at that point? But in the meantime, I think China has done quite well.
And how close are you in touch with the ambassador?
Not as much in the last several months. He has been very, very engaged in many of these activities. But we do know that through the State Department, they continue to work those channels. China has greater channels and greater accessibility to folks in North Korea than the United States does.
Sure.
So they have been very, very engaged.
And speaking of channels, there's been these reports that North Korea is actually trying this second track of finding Republicans who can explain what the Trump administration is all about. What do you make of that?
Well, that was a great question, and a question posed by one of my colleagues on the left as well. There are two thoughts, really. I mean, you try and encourage that and start developing relationships so you can exploit those relationships, or you just simply cut them off. What value would we get? We have to go through the pros and cons of either just ignore it, or encourage it and use it to our advantage. Right. And that's up for other departments to deal with.
Beyond military action, there's been a lot of talk about other potential ways to tamp down the North Korea threat, and one is a cyber attack from the United States. You're not very hopeful about that. Can you describe why?
No, because North Korea doesn't have connectivity like many of our other developed countries has. And I was explaining to Nina earlier that she probably has more connectivity at her house than the entire country of North Korea. We simply can't do a cyber attack because there is no cyber there. There is very little of that in North Korea. Korea is one of the most difficult countries to get human intelligence from because it is hardened against every other country. When I visited the South Korea-North Korea border, the demilitarized zone, just a little over a year ago, they explained to us that they have jammers all around the border of the country. So you can't get cell phone signals in, they can't get them out. It is a very, very difficult country to infiltrate.
Even for China?
Even for China, unless you're on the black market, and then you know the way. So,
okay, so out of all this bad news, you say there's some good news in that you have great faith in the team that's briefing you. Can you describe that?
We have seen so much interaction between this administration and Congress as we have faced many difficult situations, whether it's Afghanistan or North Korea. The administration is very, very engaged with us in that they are at Capitol Hill every several weeks, or we've even done a briefing at the White House as well. So we stay engaged, and what encourages me when I am sitting in those all senators briefings in our SCIF at the Capitol during those classified briefings, sitting up in front of us is Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dunford, Secretary Mattis, Secretary Tillerson, and our Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates. So we have 4 of the most powerful gentlemen that are working on these issues. And they're not just briefing us in a silo on each of their areas. They have worked together and collaborated between the agencies. If the left hand is doing one thing, the right hand knows what that left hand is going to do and can respond. So they are collaborating in a way that I know I've only been in the Senate 3 years, but in this first 6 months of this administration, I have seen more engagement and interaction than I have seen in the previous 2 years that I've been in the Senate. So they stay engaged with us. They answer our questions directly. And it's Republicans and Democrats in these briefings. And it's really interesting when they're answering those questions, when they were laying out the strategy for Afghanistan, when they're briefing us on North Korea, it's interesting to see all the heads. It doesn't matter party. We're talking about national security. All the heads in the room just nodding in agreement. But through this collaboration, we have been able to engage many other countries in this situation. And that's so important to remember that we are not in this situation alone. It is not just the United States against North Korea. Right. We have many, many partners that are very, very supportive. None of them want to see North Korea as a nuclear power.
Right. So you want to talk about Afghanistan. What are the greatest challenges facing the new policy in Afghanistan?
Well, I think one, that to start, you have to have people that have faith in it and believe in it. And we saw that expressed from President Ghani just a few days ago after he met with the president at the United Nations.
We had his wife on stage here, by the way.
Yes, wonderful.
She was fantastic.
Yeah, lovely. So when they are meeting and when the president is reassuring the Afghan people that we will support you, we will combat terrorism in your country. President Ghani is coming back and saying, you know, the difference in the administration is night and day. So one, we have to show them that we are willing to combat terrorism. We're taking the gloves off, and terrorists look out. We are working with the rules of engagement with our forces on the ground in Afghanistan, where maybe they felt that they were, they had their hands tied a little bit previously. Now our commanders on the ground can make the determinations necessary to go after those terrorists. They don't have to wait for a call from the White House to say, it's okay to take down this cell. So we can see further progress. I can envision that moving forward now that we do have a comprehensive strategy. The president has made it very clear that we're not in this for nation building. We're in this to combat terrorists. Right. And I think that's what our focus needs to be. So we will do that. There are many other countries that are engaged in nation building and would like to be part of that. Our main focus should be get rid of terrorism. That protects our self-interest.
And you've had some interesting, speaking of terrorism, some interesting views on ISIS. You have a concern that the threat has moved to Latin America and Asia.
Latin America and Southeast Asia. We see ISIS spreading, and I was infuriated when several years back, President Obama had described ISIS as a JV team. Right.
We remember that well, yes.
Yes, knowing that it really, through the use of social media and other ways of communicating, they could rapidly develop and recruit. And they have done that. And because we didn't put them down in the very beginning, we didn't combat terrorism outright in the very beginning, we now have a well-developed organization which is not just in the Middle East, but spreading into Latin America. It's spread into Southeast Asia, in the Philippines, and a lot of the planning on the September 11th attacks occurred from the Philippines. So we have to find a way to wrap our arms around this and not just contain. I hated the phrase when they use the word contain ISIS.
Right.
We don't want to contain ISIS, let's make no bones about it. We want to destroy ISIS.
And what evidence are you seeing in Latin America? Can you describe that a little bit more? Because that doesn't get a lot of attention.
Southcom, the commanders at Southcom have been very concerned about this for a while now. We've found that ISIS has been able to utilize the drug traffickers' channels. They are able to raise a lot of illicit dollars in that area. And so when General John Kelly was actually at Southcom, that was a concern of his, was that they are using these channels to infiltrate those countries, raising money through drug trafficking, other types of bad activities. And because it is not much talked about, they're able to do it. So what we have to do is make sure that when our commanders are reporting those activities, that we do take them seriously. We don't want to allow ISIS to gain foothold in any additional countries. They've been able to establish some means of movement in Latin America, and again, going back to Southeast Asia, they continue to develop there, and we continue to combat that, though. That's important, is to understand that where they have established a foothold, we're going after them, not just to contain them, but to destroy them.
So another threat in the world, Russia. Russia's military drills have the Ukraine on the edge, other neighbors on the edge. How concerned are you about that?
I am concerned about that. The Zapad exercises that we saw just recently had 60 to 70,000 troops engaging between Russia and Belarus, and we need to be concerned about this. We can't trust Putin any further than we can throw him. Right. I state over and over again that Russia is not our friend. So we should be concerned about that, because our friends and allies in Eastern Europe, they are terrified of what could happen. Our friends in Ukraine always remain concerned about what Putin might do next. You know, will it go beyond Crimea? Will it go beyond the Donbass? Will it spread through the rest of their country? Whether it is overt activities like their military exercises, or whether it is through cyber attacks, whether it is through assassinations that have been traced back to Russia. There is a lot going on there, and it hasn't been in the spotlight because of Afghanistan and North Korea.
Are we doing enough?
Yeah, I wish we would do more, I'll be honest.
Such as?
We need to provide them with lethal aid. And we have provided the Ukrainians, yes, the Ukrainians. And I have supported this. I have a measure in the Senate passed NDAA which would provide for the lethal aid, lethal assistance to Ukraine. And I do think that that is very important. It is wonderful that we can send radar detectors and uniforms to our friends in Ukraine, but they need that lethal aid. Russia won't get the message unless the Ukrainians are sending those Russian troops home.
And do you have White House support on that?
Well, the White House has not been forthcoming really on whether they do or don't support lethal aid to Ukraine, and that's why we continue to push. We continue to push. I believe it's important. I've expressed that to the National Security Advisor as well. So we will continue to push that message, and I do hope that we're responsive.
Do you think all of the issues around the Mueller investigation, does that muddy the waters in terms of where the United States should be seen in its relationship with Putin?
I think it muddies the water, but I would just say, though, with the special counsel that, if there is a trail, follow the trail. We need to know the truth as Americans. I think that's really important to have a transparent government.
Right.
But, if you don't have a trail and you're not finding anything, then at some point you need to hang it up so we can focus on priorities of our government and priorities in Congress.
But I guess I was also thinking about in other terms when there's investigations about that may show some, clearly Russia was meddling in our election, as the intelligence community has concluded. So let's take it back to that, and the potential of campaign officials that might have had some link to that. Does that muddy the waters?
It muddies the water as far as elections go, and again, they need to follow whatever trails exist out there. But moving forward, President Trump is the president, and the president is expected to do what is right for our nation. And so I would encourage the president to continue to push back against Putin. So whatever existed prior, and I don't know what existed, again, we need to figure that out. But moving forward from day one, our interests come first as the United States of America, making sure that we are protecting our interests, our national security, and the security of our allies. That's number one. If Putin is doing something or wishes us ill will, we should be pushing back against that. And the president should do that. And that's why I think he should provide lethal aid to our Ukrainian friends.
Excellent. Question cards, are they being? No, you have to write them down. Questions?
Write them down.
Bev is collecting them, other people are collecting them. I keep using up all of our audience's time, which isn't. Do you believe that it is possible for the U.S. and Russia to work together to balance against Chinese interests in Central Asia?
Again, when it comes to Russia, I think I stated I don't trust Putin
A few times, yeah.
further that I can throw in. But there are ways when sometimes adversaries become interesting allies on a very limited scope.
Right.
And right now we have certain interests with Russia, we have certain interests with China. We do have to balance that, but I would be very cautious in working with Russia.
Quick answer to this. What does the continuing resolution mean for defense spending in FY 2018? Are you concerned about where things are going? Or
bottom line, we should not be doing continuing resolutions.
Okay.
We as Congress need to do exactly what we are entrusted to do, and that is to set the budget and pass the appropriations bills. We have to get back to regular order. Secretary Mattis has stated this time and again. General Dunford has stated this. You talk to any of our service branch chiefs, they've stated it as well. With continuing resolutions, we can't do our job as a military. You can't plan long term. We can't sustain maintenance. We can't engage in the types of activities that we need to engage in when we're operating on a 3-month continuing resolution or a 6-month continuing resolution. That doesn't work. I challenge business partners out in private industry. Ask them if they operate on a 3-month budget or a 6-month budget, and they have no idea beyond that. We have got to get back to regular order. We've got to take it seriously, if for no other reason than to make sure our nation stays strong.
Let me ask you, as we're waiting for the questions, on another domestic issue. News just came out this week at the Air Force Academy where there were racial slurs directed at one of the soldiers there, or one of the airmen there, I should say. And the commander came down incredibly eloquently and hard on the perpetrators and anybody who engages in that kind of behavior. Talk about the military as being where America really is today in terms of race.
It is, and one, that should never ever be tolerated, and so we're glad that the command has responded to that. I am appalled that the airmen or the cadets didn't understand what they were doing, or if they did, they were really wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, that should never be tolerated. But our nation's military today is truly a great representation of all ethnicities, all religions, all backgrounds. Even in the Iowa National Guard, I've served with so many different people from so many different backgrounds. You see it all in the military, and sometimes it is mostly the good, and every once in a while you will have those bad actors that need to be dealt with. But I am always encouraged when I see our young people that are deciding, you know, this is a career that I want to engage in, I want to do something for my country. And, you know, we've had a rough time in the Senate lately. It's hard to get some work done, and
Really?
we've had some blows lately. But I did have a service academy night back in Iowa a while back, and the young men and women that came out to find out about the different service academies and ask questions about it, after visiting with all of those brilliant young men and women and why they wanted to serve their country, you know what, it puts it into perspective. You know, I might have bad days, but here are these young men and women that are willing to step up and serve their country and make it a better place. And I felt so good after that. It just really puts it into perspective.
Since you have to catch a plane, we're going to go through these as quickly as possible because we have a lot of them.
Okay.
Do you think Japan and South Korea should go nuclear? That's an excellent question.
Oh my goodness. Do I think that? I would defer to my friends in South Korea and Japan, and I would not want to see that. I certainly would hope that we would be able to provide the protections necessary for Japan and South Korea. But there has been talk about that, and of course we want them to do what is right for them, but we should be the ones protecting that region. We made that commitment, and it's important that we stand by that commitment.
What will Congress do if the president doesn't recertify the Iranian nuclear deal?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Another good question.
Yes,
these are good questions.
We only have a couple months to make a decision if he should not re-engage. But the Iranians have also said, well, they'll just trash the package if he doesn't sign off on it. So Congress, we didn't like the Iranian nuclear deal in the first place, at least the majority of folks in the Senate. So our response to that, just trying to look at the makeup we have now in the Senate, I think we would let it go. I think we would let the Iranian nuclear agreement go. But then understanding that, we need to know what are the repercussions then, and how do we deal with Iran should it continue to develop nuclear capabilities.
That creates a whole other
It's
issue.
a whole other conversation.
Okay, yeah, that's another conversation. A troubling one. History has shown that nation building in some form is a key element to counterinsurgency, and I know you were just critical of nation building in Afghanistan. The administration has stated we're not conducting nation building.
Right.
How do we reconcile the historical military reality of conducting counterinsurgency, counterterrorism without nation building? Where do we draw the line in engaging and supporting the Afghan government?
Well, and again, I said we shouldn't be engaged in nation building, but the people or those countries in that region that may have a vested interest in Afghanistan for the long run, the people in their own backyard, may be willing to provide those types of supports within Afghanistan. And I know that's been part of the State Department conversation with other leaders in that region. So we can send our military in, we can go after the terrorists, but in collaboration, we need to work with other countries that are willing to support those efforts. It is all part of the package. Unfortunately, the United States has put a lot of money into Afghanistan trying to do nation building with very little to show from it. There's a lot of corruption that still exists in Afghanistan. A lot of dollars have disappeared. And we have to be responsible as well for our taxpayers, but we can encourage other types of nation building activities through other means in other countries.
Pakistan, another good question. At General Dunford's reconfirmation hearing this week, he agreed that success in Afghanistan can only occur if the full weight of government and diplomacy is placed on Pakistan to change their behavior in support of insurgent groups. Where does the U.S. government start, and what leverage do you have to convince Pakistan?
Well, we do have leverage as we work with India as well, using India to leverage Pakistan. Pakistan has provided an open border for terrorists, and we have to stop that. The United States has provided different types of military supports for Pakistan in the past, different types of equipment. We don't offer that anymore. They need to understand that you need to be good partners with us in combating terrorism, or we will not be good partners to you in further enhancing your military structure.
We've danced around that for years. So what are the prospects that that's going to actually change?
I think it's finally coming to a head, and it needs to change. And again, those are the discussions that we will have as we work on the comprehensive strategy for Afghanistan. And part of that was using other countries in the region as leverage against Pakistan, so that they do start adhering to what we need them to adhere to, closing off the borders, stopping the support for the terrorist organizations. It has to happen. Tough love.
Another good topic that we didn't have a chance to talk about earlier was Syria. How should the U.S. be involved in the peace process and reconstruction in Syria? And I would add to that, not a few years back, we were all saying Assad was going to be out in a few months, constantly. It's clearly, I assume you don't see that happening.
I don't see that happening.
And so where from here, and what should the U.S. involvement be?
Well, U.S. involvement, we are involved in Syria. We do have special operators that continue to maneuver and support forces in Syria. A regime change is not necessarily what we want to see right now necessarily. Of course, I would love to see Assad gone, but the reality is he is there, and we don't have a government to go in or a replacement for Assad. So understanding what does that political future look like for the country of Syria is an undetermined. But we do know Assad. So we will continue to provide those special operators in that area. We have a number of Marines that have been deployed to Syria as well to provide for artillery support. We continue with those operations, but stabilizing that government and protecting the people that exist within that country, that will be a difficult task as we move forward.
The country that you served in, Iraq, we saw the independence referendum out of Kurdistan. Yes. What's the future? Talk about the instability there. What do you see?
It is very concerning, and the administration had encouraged the Kurdistan regional government to delay their vote. And I stood by that as well. I really, really appreciate the Kurdish people, and I appreciate President Barzani, the Peshmerga from Kurdistan. They have supported our warriors so much over the past several decades. They are important to us. But bottom line, again, we need to focus on terrorism. And the region is not stable right now because of terrorism. And if we can focus on that fight against ISIS first and then move forward in another direction later on, those are talks that we can have. But we really want to see Kurdistan working with the greater part of Iraq as best they can. If we have further division within Iraq right now, it could be very detrimental to our fight against ISIS.
This is going to be our closing question so that you can make your plane, but it's a good one as to the senator from Iowa. How do you discuss emerging threats with Middle America? How would you communicate the importance of issues that feel thousands of miles away from the farm, factory, and football fields? And I would add to this, what about foreign aid? How do you talk about foreign aid and diplomacy and the cost of diplomacy,
Absolutely.
The taxpayer cost of diplomacy
Absolutely.
to Iowans?
And I think Iowans understand this probably maybe even better than some of our other states. In a state of a population of 3 million, we have approximately 270,000 veterans. So a huge concentration of veterans from all era. You can't throw a stone in a neighborhood without hitting a veteran. And so we do have quite a global perspective. Not only are we engaged with our sons and daughters in the fight around the world, But we are also a global state in that 1 in 5 jobs in Iowa is tied to trade and exports. So everyone in our communities understands this product I'm developing, this bushel of corn that I'm growing, it will go somewhere else in the world. And so they do pay attention to what's going on around the globe. And so when I'm talking about it, I get a lot of understanding nods with folks. They understand that with North Korea being so dangerous right now, they understand that my local armory, they may have to stand up and mobilize and send our young soldiers into the Korean Peninsula should something happen. They get that because it's their neighbor, it's their son, their daughter, their cousin, their mom or dad. So they get that. And I appreciate that so much. And then for the most part, Iowans also understand that foreign aid is important. I know that foreign aid is important because if we can stabilize regions and use that as leverage, those countries that we are supporting, that we are generous to, in whether it's through medical supplies, whether it's foodstuffs, they appreciate that assistance and they're more likely to be allies and friends than enemies. So we can leverage those tools, whether it's military, whether it's foreign aid, whatever the situation warrants. But Iowans get it, and I'm really proud of that, and I'm proud of the service that they have dedicated to our nation, and they show it in so many different ways. So when I go back and my hometown, they have homecoming tonight, and if I'm sitting in those bleachers there later this evening, they get it. They get it.
Well, Joni, you clearly feel incredibly passionate about smart power.
Yes.
And not just use of force, and we truly appreciate that from CSIS.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Have a safe trip home and a safe trip
Nina.
back.
Thank you. God bless everyone.